Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Season 3 of Law Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I'm Rob Hellewell, and I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Bill Mariano, and we are excited to have you with us today. Before we dive into the guest speaker segment, which we're very excited about as usual, we want to bring you one of our favorite parts of the show, something we call
Sightings of Radical Brilliance,
which, as you know, is where we talk for a few minutes about some noteworthy innovation or legal trend or other act of sheer genius that has struck our fancy.
And today, I think we're going to get into, I think we've dove into this a little bit. This is where technology and innovation meets, stupid criminal. So this is around, you're starting to see this more and more. And Rob, you got 5 kids. You've probably seen this more than I do, but around these family tracking apps and people, and people even doing it with their friends, right? And this specific technology is called Life 360. It's out of San Francisco. And it's just, something that tracks everybody's location that you want to track, and whether they're your friends or your family. And this, this specific story is about how police used one family's access to this app to actually track down an arsonist.
Well, and this family tracking stuff is kind of interesting because, I'm connected, to my wife and to my kids and a couple of other relatives. But one of my college-age daughters showed hers to me, and she's connected to 50 or 60 different people, who are all monitoring their locations in real time. And yeah, there's some benefit, of course, like any technology. It's good to know where someone is if you're trying to meet them. But on the other hand, it causes all sorts of drama, especially if, maybe you told someone that you weren't available tonight because you had to go somewhere else. And unbeknownst to you, they can see that you're actually not there. And I'll just say that it's been the source of drama, in our family circle a couple of times.
I mean, can you imagine if you stand someone up for a date, or you stand someone up, or you're trying to get out of a business meeting or something, and you're trying to get out of a meeting with somebody, and they could actually be like, well, what do you mean you had to catch an early flight? I could still see you're a block and a half away. It's. I mean, look, this case, it was actually used for some good. The cops went and got a warrant. They found out that the kid had Life 360 on his phone. They actually talked to the mother, and they got a warrant, and they convinced the kid to upgrade from the free version to the paid version. And with that, they were able to track his father's within seconds. They were able to track his father's location to be right at the point of where the arson took place, and they were able to catch him.
It's just crazy. This is a trend that we see over and over. A great modern convenience, a great app or technology gets rolled out. And of course, the police will find a way to, solve crimes, which is good, but really unintended consequences for everybody that are using these things.
Well, I mean, and let's chalk this up to, good parenting exercise to have this type of app on your phone. Stupid criminal, don't commit any crimes when your kid is tracking where you're going. So, how much law enforcement, how much crime gets solved just because the criminal is an idiot? There's no accounting for the stupidity in the world, especially in the criminal world. So they got this guy. This guy was being a good dad and just a moronic criminal. So interesting sightings of radical brilliance, maybe on the technology side, on the cop side, not so much on the criminal side. So that's that segment for today, and really excited about our guest speaker today. Let's introduce the topic and the guest speaker now.
And our episode today is new efficiency gains in TAR 2.0 and CMML or CAML. We're excited here to have our special guest, Nordo Nissi of Goulston and Storrs, who's going to help us understand a little bit about how predictive coding has evolved and some other really interesting things. Nordo, maybe the best thing to do is just to have you introduce yourself and give us a little background on your work.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, guys. I've been working in the e-discovery space for over a decade now as head of electronic discovery and litigation technology for Goulston and Storrs. I'm responsible for all phases of electronic data discovery projects. Goulston and Storrs as a firm is very focused on client service and growth, which ties directly into the value our e-discovery team brings. Being client-centric, consultative, responsive, proactive, and a very analytics-driven firm, we're always looking for ways and places to apply technology and workflows that will defensively reduce data volumes and identify key facts as early in the matter as possible.
So this is right up your alley then. So let's talk about and level set on TAR 2.0, right? I think at this point it took years for us to finally get partners to engage and really listen to what TAR could do for them, the return on that investment, and to be and beyond that to accept the defensibility of it. I think that probably started out when judges like Judge Peck would say, hey, listen, in a written opinion, hey, listen, you have to start leveraging this technology. It's out there. Don't start talking to me about how expensive something is until you've leveraged the technology that's available to you. So TAR 1.0 has certainly, come to the point where it's being used on a variety of cases and probably used more often than not on large cases. Let's talk about 2.0 and whether it's Cal or Camel or CMML or whatever you want to call it. Let's level. So what exactly is that for our listeners?
Sure. So I'm a bit of a stickler for definitions, and so just to level set, TAR to me is just this predictive coding process, right? It doesn't include analytics or any of that other stuff. It's I live by the Grossman definition of TAR as a process for prioritizing or coding a collection of documents using a computerized system. And so the 2.0 part is that the system learns alongside the reviewers, right? The TAR 1.0 models required all that upfront training and all those statistics up front. One of the advantages to the 2.0 model or Camel or CMML is that you can just get started right away. Your case teams can just dive in and start coding documents, and the system starts learning right alongside them. And that learning continues throughout the review until you're done. So there's no point at which you need to stabilize your model or any of that stuff. So the ease of setup and then the fact that it's continually learning are two of the biggest advantages in my view.
But you'll be potentially reviewing more documents with TAR 2.0, correct? Actual manual review of documents could end up being more.
Sure. Yeah. So you're putting eyes on all the documents that you're reviewing. But if you take a sample at the outset of your review, you can still get a sense for how many documents you need to review and where you'll end that eyes on review.
I think too, I think it's probably fair to say that most lawyers don't completely understand the technology and exactly how these algorithms and models work. But one thing that I think has been compelling is the efficiency. And could you maybe just, help us understand a little bit, what efficiencies have you seen, what has worked the best and what's been most compelling as you've kind of walked to your clients?
Sure. So, the biggest win is the fact that the system can prioritize the relevant documents and maybe more importantly, deprioritize the unimportant documents. So you get the most important documents up front. So that gives you a strategic advantage that you begin to see these important documents early in your case. One of the other things that we've started doing is building models for other coding values. So for example, we've been building models for privilege, and then we use these models to score all the documents in our review population, and then we leverage that scoring as a pre-production QC. In my experience, that scoring has been much better than running your standard potentially privileged search terms. So a couple of years ago, we would be running terms like privilege within 3 of confidential or attorney-client. And these terms would bring back enormous volumes of documents that we needed to look at before we finalized our production. My experience has been these privilege scores are much more efficient. They're not bringing back every email with a footer that contains privileged and confidential, right? They're just bringing back the documents that the algorithm thinks may be privileged. And even in the false positives, we still can take a look at the document and kind of figure out why the system thought it was privileged. And it always kind of makes sense.
And can you adjust accordingly once you've figured out why?
Well, so yeah, that's the beauty of these models, right? They're continuously learning, right? So as you continue to review and code documents privileged or not privileged, the model continues to improve. So yes, it's always learning alongside you.
So that touches on the efficiency gains. And Are there any hidden efficiencies that you've seen? And if so, what are the techniques to get at them?
Sure. One other thing that we've been playing with is building different models for like keyness, right? So on an investigation, the team's often not as focused on what's generally responsive, rather focused on documents that are critical to the matter. By building a key model, you're able to prioritize key documents, and that allows you to try to really narrow in and find that needle in the haystack.
Got you. And I think people's familiarity is usually with responsive, non-responsive, maybe then privileged, and then maybe keyness, as you said before. What are some other models that you've seen used that have been helpful for clients?
Well, one thing we're beginning to experiment with is portable models. So this is a feature that some tools like Brainspace have that allows you to reuse your model across multiple matters. So if you build a privilege model for client A and you're using it in matter 1, it may be possible to take that privilege model and apply it to matter 2. And that would just allow your team to get a jump start on their review or on excluding, privileged documents perhaps at the outset, maybe through negotiations with opposing counsel. There may be some strategic advantages to even just knowing or what the potentially privileged volume in your data set may be. And so I think this data reuse is something that we're just beginning to experiment with, but I think it's going to have huge downstream effects.
That's really interesting to me. I mean, I always thought, all of this is interesting, right? But I always thought that the knock on tar was that it couldn't be used for things like nuanced as priv. But you're having some success with that, and beyond responsive, non-responsive. And frankly, though, priv could end up being only 10 or 15% of your total volume. It's often the most expensive. So it's really interesting to see someone actually taking, sort of, an off-the-shelf product like Brainspace and using it in a way that will effectively identify priv.
Yeah, and just to build on that, like our firm is technology agnostic, but one of the advantages to Brainspace is that their models incorporate metadata. So I think that their models, in my limited experience, I think the Brainspace models do a bit better than some of the other tools out there because the metadata can be so important for these privileged decisions, right? So I think a lot more research needs to be done in this area, and I would encourage any vendors out there to really invest some dollars and try to do some real good research on this, because I only have so much time to experiment and mess around with these tools. I think it would be great if the vendor community or other folks out there could really invest some dollars and some real science to try to improve these tools in this area, because I think, as you just said, privilege review is super expensive. So anything we can do to drive those costs down would be great.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, I just want to say it's important to because look, we're obviously a vendor. There are 100 other vendors out there. We have a dev department. It's important to have people like you on the other side of this that you can collaborate with. I think it's important to get into the weeds on this stuff on the phone with developers sometimes. And as long as they understand, like, look, this product's not ready for prime time yet, but here's what we're dealing with. Can we pick your brain? And I think that's a vital component of development that overall helps the whole industry, right? Because what you end up having is people that are on the ground doing the work affecting development, because it's no good to just have a bunch of developers in the room that don't actually ever review documents and or only understand the concept intellectually. And so it's interesting to get this feedback from you.
Yeah, I agree. Nordo, this has been great. And maybe just to sort of wrap up, I think that we talked a little bit about just the evolution of predictive coding or TAR in general. The advantages of TAR 2.0 or CMML or CAML being that, you can jump right into the review, have the most interesting or relevant documents sort of perk up at the very beginning of the review. Other things like, building models that go beyond responsive and non-responsiveness, including privilege or keyness, is something that I found really interesting, and I think that we're hearing other people experiment with too. I think also this idea of portable models that can be sort of taken from one matter to another matter also really poses an interesting, opportunity for cost savings and reuse of work product. And, we're big proponents of tar, at Lighthouse, and I know that you are too. And this has just been a great conversation. We just want to thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Appreciate it, Nordo.